Heather, let's go to you for a deeper dive in terms of what you're seeing. Why don't you level set us with some data and some perspective about what's happening, what are some of the trends, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Happy to. So, there's a lot of chatter about CEO tenures are way down and succession is way up. If we look over a long period of time, average CEO tenure is gradually declining, but it's not like it's fallen off a cliff. We may see significant changes from year to year due to episodic events. But fundamentally, while there's a decline, it's not dramatic. What has changed, however, are two things pretty significantly. First is historically, age was more of a predictor of CEO succession timing. Now it's much more about company performance, where you're seeing a much higher percent of CEO transitions in poorly performing companies than in high performing companies, or even sort of middle of the road, second, third quartile performing companies. The other big transition that we've seen is where successors are coming from. So historically, internal succession was represented about 80% of CEO successors, the vast majority coming from inside the company. And while they still are, the mix this year, so far year to date, has dipped below 70%, which is the lowest it's been in almost 10 years. So a pretty significant shift from internal succession to external succession, which is a pretty strong signal that the board is looking for a greater degree of change than they think they can get probably inside the company. And so as part of this, and in this environment that we're living in, Dennis asked me to provide some examples of some of the ways that we're helping boards and executive teams through all of this change. And I'd like to share three areas where we're seeing a lot of growth in terms of our work. One is around executive development. The second is actually around culture and culture evolution. And then the third is around the board being a real strategic asset. And I'll talk very briefly about each of those three, but then I welcome questions from the group. First on executive development. So a long time ago, we used to think by the time someone became a CEO or a very senior executive, they were sort of a fully formed leader and didn't need a lot of development. And if they did, they knew how to develop themselves. That's language that I've heard a lot from clients. Neither of those things are true. And you may very well be familiar with research that we, of course, continue to learn and grow over time, and our brains continue to change. And adults want to continue to learn and develop, and we can literally teach an old dog new tricks. So our perspective on development is changing. And you may have heard the analogy of thinking about a leader as a container and putting lots of stuff. We're putting lots of stuff in the container of our leaders, and think of that as new knowledge, new experiences, new capabilities. We're shoving more and more stuff into our containers these days than ever before. That stuff we think of as horizontal development. So knowledge, basically, knowledge and experience. The work that executives need to really be able to thrive in today's environment and going forward, because the world is not going to get simpler, is more around vertical development. So how they see the world, how they think, how they generate new ideas, how they relate to people. And we think of these things as more about expanding the container and strengthening the container than just shoving more stuff into it. So as we work with CEOs and boards on development, we're really focused more on adaptability, of course, but also relatability and self-awareness is a big area of opportunity for most executives. The second area where we're seeing a lot of growth and a lot of interest from our clients is around evolution of culture. Because, of course, as the world changes, business strategy changes, you can't operate the same way and expect to get different results. So culture needs to change as part of that as well. But culture change is really, really hard, which is probably not a surprise to anyone. But it's hard because it requires being really choiceful about what you do and what you don't do, and making conscious decisions about stopping doing some stuff so that you can do other things. And it's those behaviors, norms, operating principles that the team engages in day after day that eventually build up to an evolution in culture. So the work that we've been doing is really around identifying and helping executives think about what is a culture that meets their business need, where they can discreetly and clearly identify the stop doing and start doing, and that enables them to evolve over time. And then the third piece is around using the board as a strategic asset. So we do a global CEO survey every year, and we just released this year's last week. And I think you'll get a link to that coming out of this session. But one of the questions that we ask CEOs is, who do you go to talk about the issues and challenges facing the company? By far, the number one response is their executive team. Second place is their peers at other companies. And then a distant third is the board. That's unfortunate. And some of that is proximity that, they're around their executive team every day. So that's explainable and makes sense. But why isn't the board higher? I would assert a couple of potential reasons, and I'd be interested in your perspectives as those of you serving on boards and in management roles as well. But my hypothesis, and in talking with CEOs, it's either they don't think the board can be that helpful, it doesn't feel safe, or they don't have access to the board or they don't seem approachable. So as we think about helping boards be the greatest strategic asset they can be, we often help them think about kind of the who, the what, and the how of being an effective board. The who is you have the right people around the table. The what is, are you talking about the right things at the right altitude? And the how is creating an environment of trust and openness to enable these kinds of conversations.